Good afternoon or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are. Welcome to the second panel of day 4 of Land of Hope and Dreams, a celebration of Dave Marsh's work and vision. We've been working on this for about a year and a half and are just thrilled to death with how it's turning out so far. We've had some great panels and discussions already with Little Steven, Jackson Brown, John Landau. We've got more coming up, and we've got a great one for you in the next hour and a half. One of our goals in this Land of Hope and Dreams panel is to create an event that reflects the entirety of Dave Marsh and his work and vision. He's best known as a music journalist and music critic, of course, and lately a Sirius radio host, but he's always built bridges between music and politics, between performers and audiences, and his vision of social justice has been unwavering. And about the only thing that all of our guests share is a shared commitment to that vision of social justice and a passion for music. So before we move into the discussion for the next 90 minutes, though, I do want to thank my fellow steering committee members who put this together. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm a former music journalist, and now I'm editor of Streaming Media Magazine. Danny Alexander, Chris Buhalis, Charles Hughes, Susan Martinez, Lauren Anke, Alexander Shashko, Craig Werner, and Daniel Wolf have been crucial to making this all happen. David Cantwell was also there from the beginning. I'd also like to thank Karen Rose for handling our social media and helping us get the word out. I'd also like to thank our partners, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the University of Wisconsin Afro-American Studies Department, for their help in promoting this event. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame will also be live streaming Daniel Wolf's conversation with Dave Marsh next Friday, May 14th, on their YouTube channel, so be sure to watch it there. You'll notice that we are closed captioning these Zoom events. If you want to turn closed captioning off, you can go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, click on live transcript. There's a little arrow just above there, and then click on hide subtitles, and that will get rid of the subtitles for you if you don't want them. The chat is closed for these Zoom presentations, but the Q&A is open. So if you have questions for our panelists, please submit them in the Q&A tab. And at the end of the panel discussion, we will share those questions with our panelists. Last but not least, I want to mention the Kristen Ann Carr Fund. We're doing this for free. It's not a quite Herculean task, but it's been a lot of work. We've had a lot of fun doing it, and we're excited to be able to bring you these panels and spotlight discussions for no charge. But we'd also like to point you to the Kristen Ann Carr Fund as someplace you can go and help do a little good in the world if you do feel like throwing a few dollars in the way of something that really makes a difference in people's lives. The Kristen Ann Carr Fund is the foundation that Dave Marsh and his wife, Barbara Carr, set up almost 30 years ago to raise money for sarcoma research and sarcoma fellows. It's named after their daughter, Kristen Ann Carr, who passed away from sarcoma herself. So, like I said, please consider donating to the Kristen Ann Carr Fund. Now, as with all of these sessions, we are kicking them off with a message or a performance from a musician or a music journalist that has been part of Dave's life. And we're going to kick today's off with a performance from Jeff Plankenhorn, an Austin-based musician that Dave has worked with, who is going to perform his version of Otis Redding's Mr. Pitiful.
Jeff Plankenhorn here, and there was a time I was playing in the city with a guy named Joe Ely, and I get a call from my manager, and he says, "Come on down to the America's building, and come be on the air. Dave Marsh heard you were in town, and he wants you to come down to the radio station too." And so I quickly got my stuff together, and I came down. And before we went on, you were playing some Steve Cropper, because he was putting out that album with all of the music of the Five Royales, which was such a big influence on him. And I had told you that Steve Cropper, when I was really young, gave me hope for white people. And you kind of smirked and stuff, and then you said, "Hey man, let's go on air together." And so before Joe went on, and I played with him, you had me on air, and we talked about Steve Cropper and our love for what he was doing right there, and it was really, really cool. Thanks, man. So I thought I'd do one of my favorite Steve Cropper Otis tunes for you and see if I can do a little justice, do it a little different, Mr. Pitiful. Baby, that's my name. They call me Mr. Pitiful. That's how I got my fame. But people just don't understand now what makes a man feel so very blue. They call me Mr. Pitiful, 'cause I lost someone. They call me Mr. Pitiful. There's everybody know now. They call me Mr. Pitiful. Most every place I go. Oh, but nobody seems to understand now. How can a man sing such a sad, sad song? Ooh, when he lost everything. When he lost everything he had. How can I explain to you when somebody had been so very blue? How can I tell you about my past when all things were, yeah, Mr. Pitiful? That's my name now. They call me Mr. Pitiful. That's how I got my fame now. Oh, but nobody seems to understand now. Ooh, what makes a man feel so blue? They call me Mr. Pitiful, 'cause I love somebody just like you. Yeah, man. Thanks for all you do.
Hey, my name is Daniel Wolf. I've been asked to introduce this panel today, and it's my pleasure. I was talking with a friend not long ago and trying to explain what popular music meant to me. And I talked about how we both kind of agreed that as adolescents or pre-adolescents, the music that we heard on the radio was the news. There were newspapers and there was TV, but the real news, the world we care about, came through the music. And I don't think that's really changed. It may not be the same when you're my age as when I was 12, but from Kendrick Lamar to Taylor Swift, from Tyler the Creator to Sturgill Simpson, there are people who are still bringing the news. And it's very important to a lot of people. Dave Marsh, it was not only the news, I think it was lifeblood, the music. It made an enormous difference to him. And he took it a step farther, which is that he wanted to encourage it and to make sure that it kept happening, and to criticize its enemies. And so he got involved in lots of different levels of the media as I've thought about it. I mean, he was, he founded Cream Magazine, so that's the underground press. And he worked for the Real Paper, which is the same. And it's kind of the other end of the spectrum. He wrote for Newsday. He wrote for Playboy. I guess that's the other end of the spectrum. And somewhere in between, there's Rolling Stone. But his constant effort was to have the media not only bring this news, but to be able to, as I say, criticize the folks who might block it or censor it. I found a quote from 1983. It's from Rock and Roll Confidential, which is a piece of media he created, a sort of underground newsletter when he felt like he couldn't say what he really wanted to say at his regular gigs. And he's talking in 1983 about what was called the Second British Invasion, Duran Duran and company. And Dave didn't particularly buy into that. And he says, the ability of rock magazines and news weeklies to ignore black acts is also crucial to establishing such trends like the British invasion. What's going on in white pop music is always a trend. What's happening in black pop is generally presented as a more or less interesting series of comparatively unconnected events. And there's Marsh looking at the media and how they're delivering the news he loves and bringing in racial issues, economic issues, the full gamut. He's gone on, he's been at Sirius Radio for, people keep telling me different amounts, but somewhere between 15 and 17 years. He's loved the AM stations in his time. Media was essential to him. The panel we have today are experts in this field, and they can talk about not only where media is now, but what Dave Marsh had to do with it. Thanks for tuning in.
Hi, everyone. My name is CJ Janovi. I'm a journalist in Kansas City. And Daniel, thank you for that perfect introduction. It's an honor for me to be here. Dave Marsh was the #1 influence on my own work. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But first, I want to introduce the fellow panelists that we have today. So we have joining us are people who've known Dave for a really long time. Greg Drew is one of New York City's leading vocal coaches, working with numerous gold, platinum, Grammy award-winning clients. He was a contributing editor for Rock and Roll Confidential, currently assists Dave on both his Sirius radio shows, Kick Out the Jams and Live from the E Street Nation. He's also helping Dave write his memoir. So welcome soon to Greg. There you go. Hi, Greg.
Hey, hi. Happy to be here.
We have music industry legend Steve Leeds, who is currently the Vice President of Talent and Industry Affairs for Sirius XM Radio. He's a record company veteran. He's been with Atlantic, Virgin, Republican, EMI, Blackheart Records. He's run management companies, was director of on-air talent for MTV and an independent promoter. He knows Dave Marsh from back to the 70s. Steve, hello.
Howdy, greetings.
Hi. And we have Jim Rotolo, who's been in the radio industry for over 20 years as a talk show host, DJ, and producer. He began his career with the nationally syndicated program Love Phones, which I never heard. I just wanted to say that. Jim, these days he's on every day on Sirius XM's E Street Radio, where he hosts The Wild and the Innocent with Jim Rotolo, live from E Street Nation with co-host Dave Marsh, and he's a producer of Bruce Springsteen's From My Home to Yours series. Hi, everyone.
Hi, CJ. Pleasure to be here.
So I have lots of questions for you guys, but first of all, I do want to talk about how Dave Marsh influenced my own career. I was for many years an editor of alt weekly papers in the glory days. of such institutions. And I've worked for public radio and now nonprofit news site covering the state capitol in Kansas. And honestly think a better name for this panel might be "Harsher Days Are Coming." That's a line that Dave Marsh wrote in 1989. I'm going to circle back to that in a second. I came to Dave Marsh after those Cream and Rolling Stone days. I came to Dave Marsh in the Rock and Rap Confidential days, the newsletter days. When I came to Kansas City in 1990, 91, and Danny Alexander, who's one of the organizers of this series of events, and David Cantwell, who we heard from last weekend, introduced me to the work of their friend Dave Marsh. And so then I caught up with Dave. I read more of his books and have followed his work ever since. And from the very beginning, I wanted to write like Dave wrote. And there's a couple of suggested readings that are on the website for this panel. You can look them up and read them. But I want to read one of them almost in its entirety. One of the geniuses of Rock and Roll Confidential, later Rock and Rap Confidential, was that things were short, so this won't be too long. But I want you to stick with me. This was from March of 1991, which was almost the exact time I got my start in alt weeklies in Kansas City. And America is just beginning its first Gulf War. So what you're going to need to know, there were some names that will be familiar. There were some names that will translate to other names today. And they're all sort of interchangeable, I think, at this point. The one thing that you will need to know is the acronym PMRC, which stands for the Parents Music Resource Center. If you are too young to know what this stands for, go look it up after this panel. So with that, this is from the March 1991 main story in Rock and Roll Confidential. We're writing by Dave Marsh. Absolutely nothing remains of the definition of what war is good for, but the current conflagration in the Middle East at least establishes once and for all why opposing domestic censorship is essential. The women behind the PMRC, Parents Music Resource Center, are married to the men who promote the Gulf slaughter. Susan Baker's husband, Secretary of State James Baker, conducts the phony diplomacy that prevents a negotiated solution. Tipper Gore's husband, Senator Albert Gore Jr., is one of 10 key Democrats who voted to end the peace process and allow the bloodletting to commence. Meantime, George Bush has appointed Florida's ex-governor, Robert Martinez, the man who set Nick Navarro on 2 Live Crew, as his new drug czar. Navarro will serve as the spearhead of America's other open war, the drug war, even though the Martinez re-election campaign, chaired by Jeb Bush, was partly financed by contributions from drug smugglers. These connections are fundamental to understanding the how and why of attacks on free speech in America. Metallica, Robert Mapplethorpe, and NWA are targets of opportunity, establishing the context for criminalizing any journalist who mentions facts inconvenient to the government, even if they're as mild as Peter Arnett's reports from Baghdad. The government also needs music censorship because rap and hard rock will be the soundtrack for opposition to the war. Certainly other musicians will also get involved, but rap and hard rock are the only media voices directly available to those who will do the dying. Not surprisingly, it was Aerosmith who made the least ambiguous anti-war statement at the Grammys, saying they supported the troops but wanted to bring them back home immediately. You have to wonder if fear of any more militant anti-war statement was CBS's reason for keeping the best rap and best metal categories off camera. Sound conspiratorial? A week into the war, I was contacted by a Baltimore Sun reporter who wanted to know my reaction to US bomber pilots listening to Van Halen to pump themselves up for sorties. It's repulsive. I think it defiles American pop culture to use rock and roll to murder people, I said. Reporter Randy Henderson had the guts to print that comment as the final paragraph of her story, which also moved on the Los Angeles Times Washington Post wire service, much to my amazement. First we knew it had made the paper was when contributing editor Ben Eicher sent us a clip from the Rapid City, South Dakota Journal. A few days later, though, Eicher sent a clip from the highly respected Omaha World Herald. It was exactly the same comment, exactly the same story, minus my comment. The picture of America as a nation content to kill and keep on killing is exaggerated. While there's mass support for the war, it's the proverbial mile wide and inch deep. On February 18th, I spoke to over 1,000 people at Northeast Missouri State University in Kirksville, equidistant from St. Louis, Kansas City, and Des Moines. Every attack on the war and war censorship in my lecture was met with applause. So Americans are willing to listen to another side of the war story, especially when it involves links to the demise of free speech. Since the media is reluctant to tell that side, the rest of us need to pick up the slack. We should speak out, write, perform, buy and request anti-war songs and videos, pass out anti-censorship materials at anti-war rallies and teach-ins, and distribute anti-war material at concerts. We are 20 years now into Afghanistan, which is the second version of that war that Dave Marsh wrote about in 1991. I want to read one excerpts now from the other recommended reading that you'll find. This is a Village Voice article that Dave wrote, and it's very long, so I'm only going to read a couple, but this is at the very beginning of, this is October 1989. And he's writing about NWA and fuck the police. So, and he starts with by quoting from a letter from the assistant FBI directors who's written on Department of Justice stationery. And it begins, first words of this letter are, a song recorded by the rap group NWA on their album Straight Outta Compton encourages violence against and disrespect for the law enforcement officer. Dave then goes into the history of the censorship and backlash to NWA, quotes a performance by NWA in Toledo, where they performed only after Reverend Floyd E. Rose complained publicly about police pressuring local Black clergymen. Rightly or wrongly, the perception in our community is that the police think they have the authority to kill a minority, he wrote to the police chief, quoting the song. As Reverend Rose and almost everyone who has heard the song realizes, fuck the police isn't about shooting cops. It's about being bullied and tormented by them. So 1989, Dave wrote those words. And I was working as a journalist. I wanted to tell those same stories as strongly, as insightfully as Dave did. So I began to try to connect the dots. A journalist's job is usually described as we're writing the first rough draft of history. But what Dave Marsh actually did was predict the future. And so the best journalists, I think that's our job, if anyone will listen to us. And, today, Dave Marsh started with those magazines. He did the newsletter. He's done radio. He's written books, all of those different platforms. Today, we would call that a multi-platform journalist. And young journalists, right, coming out of school these days have to master all of those formats, all of those platforms. And in some ways, I think the media landscape has come full circle. I mean, I just quoted you from a newsletter that got printed on paper and sent out in the mail. And newsletters now are the newest thing for journalists who want to make names for themselves. They're on Substack. So with that, I want to ask these three folks who've worked with Dave in so many different platforms, how they saw Dave inspiring journalists, journalism, getting those stories, getting those messages out, and what maybe young journalists working today could learn from that. Steve, I'd like to start.
I just want to dedicate today's webinar to the late Ed Ward, who just passed away. He was a founder of South by Southwest. He wrote 2 volumes of the history of rock and roll. This is volume 1. So, I mean, he's in the same class as Dave in certain ways as a journalist. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. The thing you got to remember about Dave is he's a native of Detroit. He's a Midwesterner, and that's a total different perspective than us snobby East Coasters here. He knows more about Detroit rock and roll than most anybody you'll ever meet. When I met Dave, he was a freelance writer. I think he had just left Cream. He was working for Crawdaddy, Newsweek, Playboy. Daniel had mentioned a lot of the publications. And the thing, I'm fortunate to know Dave before he became Dave Marsh. He was just a journalist. And the record companies would fly him in to review concerts and say nice things about their bands. But I think they quickly learned that he wasn't going to be the normal ongoing flack who was going to talk about how the drummer was really fantastic. Dave had other issues and things he wanted to explore and talk about, whether it was about, you know, the PMRC, which he took a really, really aggressive stance against Tipper Gore and her husband. One thing to remember about Dave, he is one of the most honest people you will ever meet. I mean, what he says, he believes. I mean, there's not a dishonest bone in his body. That's just how he was raised. And I think that's important to know. The other side we really haven't touched on is his charitable side. Well, we did mention his Kristen Ann Carr Foundation. He is very well plugged into Sloan Kettering. And I know from personal experience that if there are people in the business or somehow have a connection, Dave is right there and can connect them with the right doctor and the right person at that hospital. He's also co-written an article on if you've been recently diagnosed with cancer, which I have unfortunately had to circulate at times for different people. So I think it's important to know that he has that side of him, that he has a lot of concern for people's health. When we go back to his integrity and honesty, he quit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame committee.
Nominating committee.
Pardon?
The nominating committee.
Well, I'm sorry, yes, there's a nominating committee that determines who should be on the ballot. And Dave was not happy for quite some time as to the process and the end result. And so he finally, I mean, people in the industry fight, and some of the people would cut off their finger to join that nominating committee. But Dave said, I've had enough. It's not right. And whether it was about, you know, an African-American artist or an old-time rock and roller or a country artist, he had his point of view. And if he didn't feel it was getting the proper airing, he said, I'm out of here. And it takes a lot of nerve. And in Dave's case, it takes a lot of balls, but Dave's never been held back in sharing his opinion. I mean, that's one thing with his honesty. You always know where you stand and what he says. And he's a great parent. He's helping his stepdaughter raise their child. He's a unique person, and I'd say that mold doesn't exist anymore. And I don't want this to sound like a eulogy, because it's really not.
Well, Steve, how do those qualities translate into his work as a journalist?
Anything he writes has integrity and honesty and facts. I know for a point in time he was contemplating doing an article or a book on American Idol because he found the whole process disgusting. Dave's organic, if you can possibly see that. He likes music that comes from the soul and not from people, sampling other people's work or beats and whatnot. And so that's an example of something that he was livid about. He got sidetracked, and of course that project hasn't come to fruition.
I'm still waiting for that project. I still want to read that book.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've asked him a number of times, and as the show becomes less and less important, I think it took less and less of a role in his life, and now he's more concerned with, chronicling his days and what he's done. So I think what comes across, look, I was fortunate enough. I said I met him at Atlantic Records back in the 70s. I think it was at a Jay Giles show he was reviewing. We've stayed in touch over the years. I was fortunate enough to be invited to his wedding, to Barbara. When I joined Sirius XM, I guess it's 16 plus years ago, thinking about what we should do, who we should have, the name Springsteen popped up. And I immediately said to our president, I said, look, if you're going to do anything with Springsteen, his chronicler, his biographer, he's more than one trick pony. He would be a great host because he knows so much about so many different things and musical genres and things. And so he got hired, and he's been there, and he does 2 shows. And if you listen, he doesn't mince words. He tells you as it is. Before we started, someone mentioned my relationship to him with the Born to Run book. So in the 70s, there wasn't a lot of rock and roll on the New York Times bestseller list. In fact, there wasn't any, if my recollection is right. And I was a freelance guy running around Northeast America to rock stations, trying to get them to play various records. And Dave asked me if I would help him. And so I said, well, sure, let's take your book and treat it like a record. Let's go to the radio stations. Let's have them talk about it. And when you're available, you'll go to that market, do a live interview as opposed to phone interview. And if time permits, we'll find the key bookstore and have them bring in enough books that you can be there and do an in-store and sign books. And this was pretty unheard at the time. And I think the first success we had was in Washington, D.C., with a suburban station in Maryland. And we had one of the jocks come down with Dave, and they sold a boatload of books of Springsteen. And so much so that we repeated it in several other markets, and the New York Times bestseller list, whatever methodology they used, picked up on it. And the book, I believe, debuted in the top 10, if not number 1 eventually. And it was the first rock book, and people were scratching their heads and going, how could this happen? And so people thought, oh, Steve Leeds, he has the magic touch. He must have the list of what stores and stuff. So for a while, people would come to me with books. I remember somebody came to me with a book on Blondie, and they thought, oh, he can do that with this. And I was very straightforward and said, look, Bruce Springsteen is a very literate artist. He's a poet. A book about him is going to be treated on a much different level. And the fact that it's written by a journalist who has credentials, it's got all the right elements to be a successful book. Just because you take some stories about Deborah Harry and some photos and not take anything away from her craft, it's not going to have the same impact with the consumer or the bookstore retailers. In any case, it went on to be his first bestseller, and Dave has done some amazing books. One of the ones that gets overlooked at times is his book on censorship, and his views on censorship. And I think he had, if I remember, he had a list in there of censorship, and then he had the Rock Book of Lists, which was fascinating. It was lists of different things in the rock idiom. So he compiled all that. And then he's done his bios of Pete Town of the Who and whatnot. But everything he touches has a sense of credibility and integrity, and as I mentioned, honesty. So I think we are blessed to have this man in our presence and have him to keep everybody honest, because if anybody screws up or tries pulling any shenanigans, he's going to be the first guy there, whether it's about racism or about country music or about hip hop. Dave's there, and he's the first person to raise his hand and go, hold on a second. Because he's not afraid to say what's on his mind. And you know what? There's not many people in the world who take that point of view. So I think we're really lucky to have a guy like that in our midst.
Greg, amplify that a little bit. Talk about the different...
I helped. I worked with Dave for a number of years on that American Idol book, and those are many hours that I'll never get back. But actually watching the show, which I had not previously watched before he roped me in. But one of the things that he said very early on to me is he said, I think it's the repeal of the Beatles. I think they're trying to take the power out of the hands of the artist and put it back in the hands of people like Simon Cowell, and that's evil. And that was sort of our word, idol is evil, which upon not a ton of research, we both came to think was true. And unfortunately, it seemed like we were maybe the two of us and a few other people like Jim Rotolo actually thought that way. And the music press and the entertainment press basically rolled over for them, for American Idol. And I remember, thinking to myself, boy, if this had gone on when Dave was at Rolling Stone, there would have been, several cover stories just blasting. I mean, the TV show would lie to people all the time, lie about people all the time. And we found this out with just minimal research. The contracts that they made the young performers sign were beyond slave deals. One of the clauses in the contract indemnified the show for anything that they said about the contestants, and then included the phrase, whether true or untrue, which, that's, you're basically saying we can go on national TV and lie about you for minutes at a time, and you can't do anything about it, which I thought was maybe deserved a little bit of consideration from Billboard, Rolling Stone, Entertainment Weekly, somebody, and nobody said anything. And honestly, after a while, Steve mentioned a number of Dave's books. One of the things I came to realize is he usually wrote books about things he loved, like the 1,000 Best Singles. And this was going to be a book about something that we hated. So it was, the motivation faded over time. And it also seemed like, the show's power was somewhat dissipating, if it even had any power, despite what people would talk about it being this all-powerful monolith. They actually produced really one successful recording artist now that, through the years. Carrie Underwood still has a career as a recording artist, although it's in country music, not pop, which is what they were trying to achieve. And but it didn't. Steve talked about the integrity and the truthfulness and being willing to go to bat against things that are wrong, and it didn't really seem like anybody was interested. So for those who know about the Idol book, that's kind of what happened to it. I do think anybody we ever talked to about it was shocked to hear some of the things that the show did, but it seemed like the industry was much more content to just hype it and ignore everything. which, as I said, I don't think that would have happened in the days of Rolling Stone and the Village Voice and LA Weekly and places like that. So that's the American Idol capsule story.
What other, these qualities that we're hearing, honesty, integrity, speaking out, speaking the truth, going to a bat about things that are wrong. What other examples have you seen from Dave with this sort of truth telling with the industry and pop culture, and how that translated over to politics or other
Well, I was at the New Music Seminar panel where he called out the president of the RIAA, Stan Gordikoff, to his face about the deal that the RIAA was trying to make with the PMRC and with Congress in terms of, they basically, the short version is that they basically rolled over and agreed to put stickers on records because what they were really interested in getting was a tax on blank cassette tapes. And David gotten a hold of some of these documents, and he's reading from them with Stan Gordikoff like 3 feet to his left, looking paler by the minute. And it was just an example. And this is an industry function, and the New Music Seminar in New York, and he called the guy out to his face. And I don't think he was still at Rolling Stone, but he was involved in the industry, and so that was a brave thing to do. He's always been up for a fight when it comes to politics or social justice issues. A voting rights thing in Alabama with Albert Turner way back when. This is early 80s. I know it's hard to imagine in America we had questions about people being allowed to vote and things like that, especially Black people. But back then that sort of thing happened. But he and the RRC folks produced a videotape, which I was working at HBO at the time, and I helped run off about 150 copies of the tape, which was highly against union regulations, but we did it anyway. And that's again something that Dave was always good at doing, getting people to help the cause. And after that, Mr. Turner came up to New York City and spoke at Riverside Church, and it was one of the greatest things I've ever been involved with. And Daniel Wolf was part of it also. And Albert Turner had been a personal aide to Martin Luther King, and he was actually, if you ever see film clips of his funeral, Dr. King's funeral, Albert was the guy carrying the riderless horse or guiding the riderless horse. So this was a pretty important guy, and just to be associated with him or be a little part of trying to help things was great. The name of the show back was called I'll Vote On, and it was about how they were trying to suppress, Black voters in certain parts of Alabama. I know, shocking, but that's the kind of thing that Dave has been involved with ever since I met him. And so, which by the way was at one of the book signings that Mr. Leeds put together for him at B. Dalton's in New York City. So thank you, Steve, for that. So that's my story.
Thank you, Greg. Jim, same question. All these specific media environments. What skills? What kind of special talents is Dave translating from one media environment to another?
So what Dave was able to do with what Steve and what Greg was talking about, it take all this and now broadcast it through Sirius XM radio. So this started about 16, we're going on our 17th year in October. So all of the different social injustices, the different things that were going on in the country, he now had a voice every week to talk about all of these things and explain and educate an audience, myself included, that didn't know a lot about these things. You know, I didn't seek out to read a lot of these articles. I mean, I knew of Dave before I had met him and I had read a few of his books, but, you know, now every week you could tune in and not only hear some incredible music, but also how it all weaved together in what's happening in our country, whether it's civil rights, voting, the death penalty, war, all of these topics were all included. And he has a great ability to tie it all together with music and all different kinds of music. And just, he's been able to continue to do that for 16 years. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to be a part of this ride with him every week. And you know, we talk a lot about, you know, what Steve had mentioned earlier, his honesty. I mean, Dave always gives you the truth. And sometimes we don't like to look at the truth, or sometimes we don't want to hear the truth. But on Sunday mornings, Dave delivers the truth, and it's right there in your face. And then after that, he plays you an incredible song or two, which is really what's the great gift of what Dave is able to do, because his music knowledge is just absolutely incredible. And I've just learned so much from him during this time. And it's just been a pleasure for him to, you know, he has this ability to just kind of explain things in a very simple way that people can sort of understand. And I've met people from all over the country when Dave and I would go on the Springsteen tours and we would do these pre-show broadcasts, and people would come up to me and say, you know, I didn't know about, you know, I knew about the Vietnam veterans, but I didn't really know to the extent. Thank you, Dave. And of course, thank you, Bruce Springsteen, for, you know, educating me on this kind of stuff. You know, big deals like civil rights are very important to Dave. He's always a big champion and supporter of hip hop and R&B. One of the other things that he was able to do through Kick Out the Jams over the years is make sure that some of the older artists from the 50s and 60s, people that have sort of disappeared, have, you know, fallen away. They're out there and they're poor and they have money coming to them. And he was able to figure out ways to get money to these people who they deserved. You know, he's always looking for a cause. He's always looking for, I guess, for justice for everyone. Very much in a way like I'll call him a superhero if you'd like to hear that. He's just has always been fighting for a cause or several causes. And, you know, he's just been a great educator and role model for me. I enjoy his interviews immensely. The conversations that he is able to have with artists from all different walks of life, you know, the Pete Townsends and the Bruce Springsteens of the world, those are incredible conversations. But for him to spend 45 minutes with a Nigerian hip hop artist, someone he had only listened to the CD earlier in the week, not knowing much about this person's background, and to have this connection, this conversation between these two people from completely different worlds was just so incredible for me to sit there and listen to this. And that's the thing that I think one of the gifts of Dave is he has a way of connecting everyone, no matter who it is, through the music, through the conversation. It all weaves together. And along the way, you get to learn quite a lot, not only about the issues, but a little bit about yourself as well. And he, like I said, he's been a great teacher for me and a great mentor. And it's been an absolute pleasure. And it's been an honor to work with him for the past 16 years.
I have two follow-up questions for you.
Okay.
Okay. So first of all, that scenario that you just described, where, you know, a journalist is very quickly having to get up to speed on some issue. In this case, you just described, you know, Dave listened to this artist's CD just earlier in the week and is able to talk to them then for 45 minutes. what did you see? Like, how was Dave able to absorb that information very quickly and get to the right places when he's talking with these artists that he may be learning a lot about them for the very first time in those conversations? What did you see? How was he working? How was he doing that? What was he asking?
Well, I think the number one thing that I've noticed of every artist that sits down with Dave is that he has this ability to make that artist feel comfortable and know that they can trust him. And once he's able to establish that, which is usually very early on in the conversation, then it's really the artist who feels more relaxed and at ease and is able to open up. Dave has a great ability to get people to open up and talk with him.
Yeah, I want to know why. What does he do?
It's a good question. It's a very good question, CJ. I think it's just because he genuinely cares and is concerned about what you're promoting, what you're talking about in your songs and in your music. He's not just doing it because he's a music journalist. He's doing it because he is a fan and he wants to hear your message and he wants to know about you. He's genuinely personally interested. And I don't know if that, to me, I always thought that makes him different from other people that I've been around that have done these kinds of conversations throughout the years. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question or not, but that's what I have noticed about him over working with him for all these years.
CJ, also, I've been working with him, on the show for the last year, and I'm not allowed to use the word interview. He's
Correct.
having a conversation, and we
That's
use
correct.
that word a lot, but where he prepares and he knows what he wants to, a couple things that he wants to talk to the person about, but it is in fact a conversation. He listens to what the person says, and then the next question flows from that, much like a regular conversation. If you met somebody, if you had a blind date, if you were sitting next to somebody in an airplane for 3 hours, I mean, it's a conversation. And I've learned to say, we have a conversation with John Fogerty next week at 1 p.m. or something like that, because if I say interview, he'll kind of look at me funny, and then I'll have to say, oh yeah, you're talking, it's a conversation. So that's and it's funny that we use that word. You used it, Jim used it, but I do think that is someone that's something that's unique. He doesn't come in with a list of 10 questions and run them down, check. Okay, oh, we skipped number 7, go back to that. No, it's a conversation in the best sense of the word. And I think that's why everything Jim said about getting people to open up and things, I think that's where it comes from.
Yeah, there's not necessarily an agenda. There is a conversation, as Greg had said, and that's where I think separates him from other people that do these interviews. We'll go back to with artists, where the artist sort of knows what they need to answer because they're promoting whatever they're promoting. Whereas Dave wants to have that conversation. We'll get to the project of what it is the artist is promoting, but let's talk about all these other things as well. And I've always noticed that when the conversations are finished, the artist is always smiling and is so happy that they sat down and had that conversation with Dave. And it's, like I said, it's been all walks of life, from your rock heroes to unknown artists who may not even know who Dave Marsh was. And that's just one of the brilliant things about Dave.
He champions a lot of unknown talent. I mean,
Yeah.
he'll put on people who don't have record deals, or just some random artist he got in the mail, or just something he found somewhere, and he doesn't care. I mean, he'll put Pete Townsend and John Fogerty on, but he'll put some young band that no one's ever heard of before and give them their first shot. That's unusual.
Yeah.
Well, and also I can say, Jim was just saying about what the artists are like when they're done. I think it's okay to reveal this. A few years back, he got to interview Van Morrison, who is a big hero of Dave's. And that was one he was maybe a little bit nervous about, but they had a great 1 hour talk. And Dave said one of the best things anybody ever said to him after interview was Van was starting to walk away, and he turned back to Dave and said, you know, that was kind of like jazz for an hour. And that made him very happy. And that is what those conversations is like.
Yeah, I'd like to mention one other conversation that Dave had where he seemed a little bit nervous. It was with Ray Davies from the Kinks, who showed up at our Sirius XM studios at 9 o'clock on a Sunday morning. And which, you know, I was quite shocked that he was actually showing up in person. And, you know, Dave was a little nervous about it. I guess Ray had the reputation of being a little bit difficult to talk with. But Ray Davies, could not have been nicer to both Dave and myself. And the conversation was incredible. And like I had said earlier, you know, Ray Davies walked out of the studios with a big smile on his face and was really happy that he had that conversation with Dave. So yeah, that was one of those other ones where I actually saw Dave nervous for a little bit.
Steve, you're nodding. Do you want to?
Doesn't happen often.
No, Ray Davies is very complex, complicated, doesn't do a lot of interviews. And I know when his most recent reissue came out, the BMG was like, they kept saying, yeah, but can we do an interview with Dave Marsh? Can we do an interview with Dave Marsh? And you know, it's like, well, there's a lot more to do other than just Dave Marsh, particularly when you have a piece of music that you want to get played. And Dave shows more talk while he does play some music. But Ray is notoriously known as being lazy and difficult. And the fact that he would show up on a Sunday morning, I mean, the respect people have, like a Ray Davies, for Dave Marsh, you just can't quantify that. You really can't. I mean, there are people respect him. He's a known entity. I mean, Pete Townsend talks very highly of him. There's just a lot of the artists, it's Dave. Yeah, let's talk to Dave.
Yeah.
Can you guys, anyone who has the first thought, jump in? But this was my second follow-up question for you, Jim, and which is, you know, those conversations that happen every week, where Dave has this voice to convene these conversations about whatever is going on in the world. Can you think of an example or two that was maybe more enlightening? Something happening in the world, in politics, that you guys have sort of very quickly had to respond to, and create a playlist, create a conversation that ended up being more than what you imagined in the beginning, or you could feel the audience being educated, learning, being able to see in new ways that they hadn't, just days before. Does any particular show or two come to mind?
For me, the first show ever of Kick Out the Jams, which was back in 2004, it was in October, and it was, a little less than a month away from the presidential election with George W. Bush and John Kerry. And I didn't know what to expect. Dave and I had met maybe twice before, and he was picking all the music, which, coming from terrestrial radio, to me was, wow, this is going to be great. He gets to pick his own songs. And so I didn't really know what he was going to come in with. And I just remember the first episode after the Kick Out the Jams MC5 intro, that'll wake you up on a Sunday morning. I think the first three songs were Sly and the Family Stone, Everyday People, I Swung the Election by Jack Teagarden, and maybe Bruce Springsteen, Land of Hope and Dreams. And I was like, this guy is definitely onto something. But he actually talked about, because you have to remember 2004, it was the presidential election right after 2000, where we didn't know who was going to win. There was all those problems. So Dave, this is his first show, starts talking about election fraud and what we should be prepared for in November. Completely blew my mind. And I think it blew whoever was listening that morning. Oh, wait a minute, maybe we should be paying attention about what may be coming, this in a few weeks. And Dave did that for the next several weeks, even till after the election. If you remember, it was decided, but there was some controversy behind it. So, I mean, that was something that was very immediate. We definitely worked off the news every week, and we still do. But at that time, the show was, and it was branded as the crossroad between music and politics. So, to me, that's just one example of something. He's done numerous shows on war, because the wars are constant in our country. So I think those are always topical. So those are just a few examples that I can think of off the top of my head.
Say more about working off the news every week, though. What does that look like?
Well, politics.
How do you make it happen?
Well, Dave, he really goes to alternative sources for information, and then also the mainstream sources as well. And he has his own opinions and his own life experience and the people that may be involved that he reads about. And, he will form his own opinions about whatever is happening, whether it be an election or the war or the economy or, a particular civil rights movement or a voting issue. That there might have been there was a case where there was a person on death row. I can't remember where it was, and it was in the South. And so, this wasn't in any kind of mainstream news. Nobody was going to know about this person, what had happened and what was about to happen. And Dave did a whole episode. He did a whole 2 hours on this. So that was, again, that was something that was in the news, but maybe on the back pages, something that most people wouldn't even know about, myself included. And we ended up delivering a 2-hour show about it. So that's kind of where I guess the immediate immediacy of it is playing off the news.
Anybody want to add anything?
I think it's also important to, it's important to remember what Dave's goal is. And I saw him at a panel of journalists at the New Music Seminar in 1981. And he said it yesterday on the radio. His goal is to change the world. And that's always been his goal. And, it's a little.
While we wait for Greg to finish that thought, Steve, want to jump
an
in on-
ambitious,
Steve, you want to jump in on Dave changing the world?
He's a troublemaker.
and all the other
That
things
is.
that he's done throughout his life. I mean,
And he-
Daniel.
If you just look at Dave's collection of people he surrounds himself with, it's not all people you'd expect him. I mean, priests, doctors, politicians, doctors of all types, neighbors, his kids' friends. I mean, he's got a universe of people that is very different than most people would have. And I think that adds to his worldview. He sees things very differently than most people. I mean, most people have their peers as their friends. I mean, Jim, you'd agree with me. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me who he associates with, or he'll just throw a name at me and I'm like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So
I mean,
true.
that's another just sort of key reality for anyone who wants to succeed at journalism is to surround yourself with such an array of folks from different places in the world. And, I'm thinking about, as I'm listening to you guys talk about these experiences, and I'm thinking about, my own frustrations often as a journalist, which were more often than not with my bosses. Whatever editors and media companies I was working for, which I've had a very rewarding career at all this. But I remember Dave at a really crucial moment when I was really pissed off and about to quit. I don't even remember why, but we were at a conference and we took a walk, and I was telling him my woes, and he gave me really one of the best pieces of advice ever. He's, whether or not I was going to quit, he reminded me that what I was doing at this publication, he said, you're making something. And so whenever I sort of begin to wonder what I'm doing or why I'm doing it, it doesn't really sort of get more elemental than that, So regardless of whether I'm changing the world, I'm making something. And I wonder if you guys have had similar, pieces of advice from Dave yourselves that have sort of carried you through, or if you've heard him give advice to others that would serve as, to help young journalists coming up in the world now.
Well, it's bigger than that. I think he's really good at giving advice. And on a lot of different topics, whether it's the right doctor, the right lawyer, how do you handle this political situation? What should I do here? I don't know how to handle this. He's really good at that. He has a way of cutting through the BS and getting to the essence, and he'll always have a solution or a suggestion, or maybe another person you might want to talk to has more information, or you should go see them because they'll tell you what to do. And that's another skill. I mean, it makes him unique. I mean, I don't know too many writers or rock historians like him that would have that ability to do that. I think it's unique.
Was there one nugget of advice though, Steve? Or anyone?
For me, I could say working with Dave, once we established East Street Radio, which was Dave's idea, to come up with a radio channel dedicated to one artist's music, which was, innovative at the time because nobody had ever done anything like that before. Developing myself as an on-air personality, I think the one thing that he had said to me was, it's very simple advice, but it made all the sense in the world because it came from him. And he said, look, don't be anybody else but yourself on the air. People genuinely like you and want to listen to you because they're interested in what you have to say. He said, my role in this channel is much different than yours. And so don't try to do something that you don't need to do. Just be you. And it'll take you a lot further than trying to do something else. So it's a very simple piece of advice, but it's been very helpful to me. And it's something that I remind myself of because I always, sometimes you doubt yourself, like, what am I really doing here? Where's my role in all of this? And that piece of advice that Dave gave me always kind of sticks with me. It's just be yourself, enjoy what you're doing, and have fun with it. And I've been doing that, ever since. So it's just one simple piece of advice, but it's really worked for me. So that's the example that I can give you.
Greg, you might be on mute, I think.
Yeah, he's there.
Looking forward to this advice.
Greg, unmute yourself. You got to hit the little tab there. There you go.
Didn't do it yet. There you go.
Hello.
There you are. Go
There
ahead.
you are, Greg.
Hello, London. And I'm sorry. Jim and Steve both know my inability to operate on the internet, but it's never been a piece of advice. It's just been things that I've observed from knowing Dave for all these years. Things like there's two parts to the music business. There's the art part and the commerce part, and both of them deserve attention at sometimes at different times, sometimes at the same time. There's a place for Louie Louie and 96 Tears. There's a place for Nebraska and Who's Next and What's Going On. And they're all rock and roll. Never leave before, if you're doing an event where you're talking to people, don't leave until the last person wants to talk to you. Because it may be somebody that you end up being friends with for 40 years. And I'd say the biggest thing is to be brave. The stuff that he does for the Kristen Ann Carr Fund and the stuff that we do at Memorial Sloan Kettering, every year we do something there. To me, it's just he's showing the bravery he has to actually walk into that building and deal with sick kids after what he and Barbara and Sasha went through, and all the fundraising they've done and everything that they've accomplished with the fund is a level of bravery that we should all strive for.
How many guys you know can write a book on Elvis Presley and the Who and then turn around and collaborate with a doctor on writing an article on how to deal with just being diagnosed with cancer? I mean, that's a pretty diversified individual, I think. And, you know, and then going back and telling you about early Detroit rock, and yet still understanding contemporary music and hip hop that's going on today. There's not many guys like that.
No, and I should mention, because this is something I've had a unique opportunity, and every year the Kristen Ann Carr Fund throws two Christmas parties. One is for the outpatients, and it happens at various New York City locations like the Hart Cafe or Sony building, whatever. And then we actually go, after 3 or 4 years of doing that, the people at Sloan Kettering actually asked Dave to come and be Santa at their pediatric Christmas party. And I'm sort of the head elf / dresser / Santa security. So I've gotten to do this for like 25 years. And all of you who think you know the snarky Detroit badass should see what happens once he puts on the Santa suit. He is amazing, and as I said, we're also in a place in a building. His daughter passed away. We're dealing with sick kids from the ages of 18 months to 18 or 19, and put it this way: this is. Jim knows that he had an engineer in the early days of Kick Out the Jams called Cara, and she got invited to come along. And so when we got there, I said to her, now listen, once he puts on the suit, he's a different guy. And first off, you have to call him Santa. And secondly, you're gonna see a different guy. And she kind of gave me that like eye roll. Yeah, sure. I've worked with him for 5 years. I know what he's like. And so, you know, we got him in the suit and we went out to the party with all the kids, and she was helping him hand out gifts. And after about 3 minutes, she came over to me and said, who is this guy in the suit? And what have you done with Dave? And that was, you know, the reaction to Santa Marsh. And the best compliment that I think we ever received was apparently the folks from Macy's heard about the party at Sloan Kettering, and this is like 3 or 4 years ago, and called over and said, would you like our Santa Claus, you know, to come be at this Christmas party? The people, you know, Santa Claus, Macy's, you know, Miracle on 34th Street, it's like the Santa, right? And the people at Sloan Kettering said, no, we're good. We got a Santa. So as far as I'm concerned, every year, that's my favorite day of the year. And there are a lot less sick kids and a lot of kids that are not as sick as they used to be. And that's all because of the Christian and Car Fund. And that's why if you can spare a few bucks, please contribute, and please keep us in our thoughts down the road.
Oh, thank you for that, Greg. If you're watching and if you have questions for our panelists, put those in the Q&A. And I think there's probably going to be a link to the Kristen Ann Carr Fund site there also. I don't know if we already have any questions. If Danny wants to jump in and let us know.
Yeah, we have a couple, and we actually have a couple from different directions. But in the Q&A box, we have this one that's fairly sizable, and I'm just going to read it. And I think there's a lot of different things that you all can respond to here. It's from Scott Pellegrino. It says, Dave's one of America's greatest writers ever. I even wrote him in twice for president back in the day, which is why it's so tough to see him spending so much time kissing Springsteen's ass. Springsteen has been selling out his fans so much over the past few years. He did that horrid Christian supremacist commercial recently for the ultra vile, super racist GM car company, the very company who evicted Dave and his family from their home years ago, and the very company that's given massive money favoring the Nazi GOP in 9 out of 10 most recent election cycles. Bruce also has made himself a tool of the worst corporate Democrats like Hillary, Obama, Biden, who literally paved the way for that vermin Trump while totally ignoring righteous Bernie Sanders. Why can't Dave and his comrades do more to stand up to this phony, poisonous BS? And we have an extra little PS for Jim. And Rotolo, I think I recently heard you say that you have zero problem with anyone endorsing any company. This makes it seem like Dave has had no real effect on you. What gives?
Oh, I can answer the second part of that question.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. And I think, and I've had this conversation with Greg Drew here on the panel several times about this when Mr. Springsteen decided to do the ad for Jeep. I just don't see an issue with it. And I know that I think goes back to a previous generation of rock credibility, that if you did a commercial, you were considered a sellout. I'm a little bit younger. I grew up on MTV, and I didn't see a problem with, rock stars or hip hop artists or anybody, pop artists, endorsing products. I just never saw an issue with that. And that's where Dave and I, as much as we are alike on certain things, that's one of the things that we do differ on. And I don't think there's, like I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. And it's only taken, and I cannot speak for Mr. Springsteen, or, it's only taken him till 2021 to decide to do a commercial, and he has every right to do so. So that's my take on it.
Anyone else?
I think Dave would take the censorship role here and say, don't try to censor Bruce Springsteen, what he can and cannot do. And I think, I think that's a fair analysis that Dave would take. It's also Sirius XM, we don't censor. And so if Bruce chooses to work for a company that Mr. Pellegrino disagrees with their politics, that's everybody's right. This is America. You do what you want, but it's freedom of speech and freedom to take action. And if Bruce wants to do that, and if Dave is comfortable with that, or Dave doesn't see any reason to comment on it, so be it.
Greg, did you want to add anything, or CJ too?
No.
CJ, do you have any thoughts and reaction on that?
I'm still processing the question a little bit, but I sort of think, from my post out here in the middle of America, I'm probably, 4 hours from the location of the photo shoot of that Jeep ad. And I can tell you that I had lots of feelings about that ad. I love it anytime the flat, stark beauty of the prairie in winter gets shown off to the rest of the world. But I would also say that someone coming here and paying attention to us has complications. I mean, there were so many people here who were so happy that he did that ad, and so happy to see him making a stand, lighting a candle in a church, begging for this country to reverse course, to stop the trajectory that it's on and find some way to return to common ground. And I think that's a totally valid plea to make to America right now. On the other hand, being out here, I feel every day these sort of bad faith arguments that are coming from parts, neighbors, people in this country who feel like, the neighbors are the worst enemy. And that's a tough spot to be in. And for a lot of us, I think, the idea of finding common ground with someone who would just as soon you not exist it is a rough argument to make. So, I feel like to dismiss anyone's effort to try and stop the course that we're on right now is better than all of the efforts everywhere to keep that current course going. That would be my response to that question, which I'm still not entirely sure I understand. So maybe we have another one.
Yeah, we do. If you don't mind me throwing in something here, I think in many ways, a lot of what I've certainly gathered from Dave over the years is like very much like what you were talking about when he was talking to you about your building something. There's a lot to consider, and there's a lot that works in the real world wherever we are at any given point, and there's a lot of things that people make choices. I mean, last night we hit the end of that conversation with Jackson and Steve. In many ways, they were despondent, over the options ahead of us. But everybody's playing, the role they feel like they know how to play, and it's complicated.
There's reason to be despondent.
Yeah, well, there's lots of reasons to be despondent. We do have a couple of just nice comments that I wanted to just mention. Was it Donna from Bruce Funds, who I know Jim knows well, Greg as well, who gets. How would you describe what she does?
So Donna started Bruce Funds. I want to say it was during the Bruce Springsteen's Wrecking Ball tour in 2012. So basically what she had done was figure out a way for people that have tickets to a show that can't go, instead of selling them and scalping them, there are people that can't afford tickets. And so basically it's a way of getting people that have tickets to people that really want to go but can't afford to do it. So there's no money involved. It's all done in goodwill, in the spirit of Springsteen, and rock and roll, and just helping people all over the world get tickets to shows that by certain means or lack of financial means are able to get to. And she's done an incredible job with it. We really appreciate it.
Sometimes it's people that have bought 4 tickets, and they've got now suddenly they have one person drops out or something, and so people will contact her and say, we got an empty seat for Baltimore, if there's somebody that should be coming or something like that. It's a terrific thing that she does. It's a wonderful.
And I've worked with her too. I'm glad you guys explained it though, because it takes on a lot of different variations.
And I just want to mention, Danny, really quick, just so people know this. Donna does not collect a single penny from this. She absolutely makes no money on this at all. This is just done out of the kindness of her heart. And I know she does this in the spirit of her mother, who she was very, very close to, who she had lost a few years back. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I know she's listening right now.
Yeah. And she just wanted to say to the panel, I always remember Dave's advice to keep walking it like you talk it. Sums up much of what you all have expressed today. Thanks so much. Yeah, so
Thank you,
just wanted to
Donna.
be sure and answer that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah. So we also have, we had a little run here. Okay, sorry, I got a little bit confused. Steve rattling off the book titles makes me think about a question about collaboration. So many of those books, lists, Christmas, censorship, were collaborative, as was RRC. Wondering about the place for that. Is that possible in today's current media landscape? Or is it maybe more common in today's media landscape? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Steve, I saw you nodding. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah. I think collaboration is more current these days. And I think, Dave was in the vanguard of that. I don't know if it's by design or just he needed somebody else to bounce ideas off of. But yeah, I think collaboration is a good thing in 2021.
Yeah.
I mean, you definitely see it in songwriting. So why wouldn't you see it in literature?
Yeah. Good. Anyone else want to add anything to that? I have a couple more.
Well, I think that is something that Dave's always done. I remember him, he had the galleys for the Heart of Rock and Soul, big, huge, pages of the different thing. And this is when he was still living in New York, and I went over to his apartment. He said, well, look through those, see what you think. And I told him that number 5 should have been number 1, which was Like a Rolling Stone, and he gave me a hard time about that. And then I got into the 20s, 30s, and I said he had She Loves You, and then about 10 songs later he had Ticket to Ride. And I said, I understand She Loves You with the yeah, yeah, yeah thing and all that, but I mean, Ticket to Ride is such a great record. It's got this great drum part and great singing and a great bass line and that great guitar lick. I really think maybe you want to, put it ahead. And he looks at me and he goes, you and Landau said the same thing. And he makes a big theatrical move of taking She Loves You out and swapping it with Ticket to Ride. And I felt like I graduated from, got my doctorate in rock and roll smartass from Dave Marsh. And
then he threw you out of his apartment right after that.
Oh, yeah, no, he didn't speak to me for months after, but no, it's getting people. One of the great things, and I guess it's why we're all here, one of the things that Dave was always best at was involving people, using his resources to involve, people in like Steve with the book promotion and Jim and all the people that wrote for Rock and Roll Confidential. And as I said, he's doing something. He needs some video.
Oh, we're losing.
We lost Drew
Greg,
again.
Greg, speaking of the Beatles, let's not forget.
He calls the guy he knows that works at HBO the cheap. You lost me again?
Yeah, Greg, you keep popping in and out.
I was just going to say, let's not forget Dave wrote a book on his favorite Beatles album, the Beatles' second album, which really wasn't an album except in America. And Dave wrote a book on the Beatles' second album and why it's a great album. I mean, it just amazes me the topics he can put together and make a book.
So since we're almost out of time, and I want to emphasize that point that you just made. So this range of topics, that is just essential for any journalist. He excelled at it.
Yep.
He serves as a model and an example for anyone in this industry trying to do this work. And I would also just emphasize the other themes that we've been talking about. just, I guess I'll just put this in a little bit of a list form, skills that really all humans need. But since we're talking about the media, let's wish all of these for all of journalism: honesty, integrity, having conversations and listening, making connections, caring, being a smart ass, and putting on your fucking Santa suit. So, whatever your Santa suit might consist of.
That is an amazing place to end this. Thank you so much, CJ, Greg, and Jim, and Steve and Danny. It's been a terrific conversation. And I love the way that the personal anecdotes shed light on the topics that CJ was walking us through. That was wonderful. Thanks again. We've got another panel coming up in an hour today, our last one of the day. It's our keynote panel called Listening Past the Myths. It'll feature Robert Christgau, Greil Marcus, Greg Tate, and Ann Powers in conversation with Lauren Anke, focusing specifically on music criticism. So hopefully we'll see you for that. That wraps up this one. See you again soon.
Thank you so much.